See, I might leave a bit of time to start. There we go. Hello, you listeners. Don't listen to this podcast all about the 1,001 albums to listen to before you die, or allegedly should. I'm your host, Ewan Gleadow, as ever, talking about albums and stuff for a living, writing at all sorts of places, podcasting at all sorts of places, and doing it all on my lovely new website, which you can see now. It's all very flash, very new. Still don't know if it
Yeah.
works. Haven't worked out all the creases yet, but those are to be ironed out. That'll be fine. But I am, as ever, joined by a fantastic guest, Nicolò Grasso. Welcome back. You are, as ever, dependable because I forgot to schedule out some episodes for when I'm on holiday. Welcome back through certainly a choice of your own to come back. How are you?
You know me, I'm good. I'm happy to be here. Always excited to dive into some quality music. Maybe. Who knows? Who knows? Maybe. We'll see today.
Yeah, well, I mean, considering the run of form I've had today, I'd say the Beach Boys album is the worst thing to happen to me today, on
Okay.
the grounds of second place is nearly blowing myself up. Not in like a hyperbolic sense, not as
In a
in,
literal way.
in a genuine, like, I almost blew myself up kind of,
Jeez.
not like a minor explosion, like a major gas leak explosion. I nearly caused one. Because I'm making
Oh
lunch,
my.
nice fried egg and a bun.
Yeah.
Um, and the clicker for the gas hob wasn't working. It was just making clicking noises, but I didn't know it was releasing gas in a lot of it.
Mm.
So I was like, oh, that's fine. I'll just move it to the back hob. Set the back hob off, lit it, it ignited, and what happened was all the gas that was around the hob just kind of blew up in my face. It was a nice egg though,
Jeez.
really nice.
It was worth it.
Oh, it was worth it. Yeah.
Oh my.
But I can't even, like, even if it had burnt my face, it wouldn't have been the first time I burnt my face off. So it's kind of like, it's not too shabby. These looks they stick around. Um,
Jeez.
And speaking of sticking around, the Beach Boys, they have been around for quite some time. I'll fire through the keynotes and the insert, which obviously hinted at when I said it was the worst thing that would have happened to me today. It kind of reminded me why I started this podcast. I
Hmm.
felt a little running on empty recently, a little tired. Felt like I was repeating myself with my writing, and then I read this and thought, at least it can't get this bad, which really set me up for my day. So, keynotes as ever, the Beach Boys today, 1965, by the Beach Boys, which includes obviously Brian Wilson, Michael Love, Dennis Wilson, Al Jard, and Carl Wilson, but also Glenn Campbell on guitar. And we'll get into that later because it was a bit of a shock to see the man that did Rhinestone Cowboy on there. Nonetheless, the Beach Boys today, pop, rock, baroque pop, and sunshine pop, 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 rock, pop, pop, rock, pop. Onto the insert we go.
A lot of pop.
A lot of pop, yeah, but that's the Beach Boys, isn't it? It was yeah. I'll have a quick swig of water and we'll grind on through the 4 paragraphs.
I, I,
Pop it
I
up.
I live for this part. It's my favorite part of the show. Is like, what does this man have to say?
I
This expert on music. What are his thoughts?
absolutely nothing this time. Despite we can go through this and just break it down because this is an hour's worth of content here. But
Okay.
despite containing what is easily the worst track in this entire book, this
Oh
is the
my.
perfect Beach Boys LP. So
Oh.
out of 1,001 albums, plus the insertions, the additions, the omissions, as in the ones they've taken off, not the ones I'm putting on. This album has the worst track in the book's history. They don't mention what track it is,
It's up to
so
us to figure it
it's up to
out.
me to figure it out. I'm pretty sure I can figure it out. It's one of the 11. But it's also a pretty bold claim to say not only does it feature one of the worst songs ever written on this album or in this book, it's also the perfect definition of the Beach Boys' sound. Which, we did Surf's Up. I had John Nichol on for that, and we spoke about Surf's Up and how dark it was, very mellow, very,
Mm.
very tortured album. And then you've got Pet Sounds, obviously, is their big peak, and it's Brian Wilson really dealing with a lot and putting it onto the tracks there. They're major albums, they're incredible albums, they're very important albums. To say that the Beach Boys today is perfect and that it's arguably better than those two is the stuff of madness, but we will persevere because, according to this insert, this album is split evenly between carefree boy meets girl pop and dramatic ballads inspired by Phil Spector's girl groups. Even arguing that it is better than Pet Sounds is a cinch. With a bit of practice, there is none of the self pity that weighs heavy on the later album. It's not self pity, it's more schizophrenia, but
Yeah.
swings and roundabouts, I suppose. Um, Although it was recorded shortly after Brian Wilson had broken down on tour, exhausted by his
Ah,
relentless schedule, the Beach Boys today opens with one of the most exuberant songs the band ever recorded. After a muted first couple of verses of Do You Wanna Dance, Brian turns the volume up for the first chorus and the 60s starts swinging. This released in 1965, 5 years
that's
after the start of the 60s. If it wasn't
yeah.
swinging by then, I'd have been mightily shocked. Um, the rest of the side continues the party groove. When I Grew Up was the most complex and mature thing Wilson had written to date. Help Me Rhonda was an early attempt at what would soon become one of their most celebrated singles with an extra H in the title. But it is the second side that gets connoisseurs purring, which is possibly one of the worst uses of the English language I've ever read.
Purring.
Purring. Yeah. The five ballads are lush, personal, sensitive, and vulnerable love songs, unlike anything else in pop at the time. See Please Please Me by the Beatles from 1963 for something that was like that at the time.
Jesus.
There are clear blueprints for what would evolve into Pet Sounds in Please Let Me Wonder and Kiss Me Baby, but the latter is every bit as good as God only knows. For the first
Mm,
time, Brian had overtaken the Beatles and the Stones, catapulting the band into the A-list and beginning a 2-year battle for supremacy that would end with another breakdown in the aborted Smile sessions. Remember them this way. Quite an insert. Usually I ask what your memories are of an album, but I'm pretty sure I asked you to do this one with me. Um,
yes.
what do you think of the insert? What do you think of what I've just read there? Thoughts? Sorry, I've
It's
picked up my water and my course has come with it.
someone's letting go. Um, it's very chaotic. There are a couple of parts where I'm like, okay, yeah, I can see that. I can kind of agree. I think what he says, especially about when I grow up to be a man, there are some of the more mature lyrics that have been written by the leader of the band. I agree. Um, but other than that, yeah, I don't really see this being, definitive. Okay, in a way, I can kind of see this being considered kind of a definitive album for the time, in the sense that it kind of encapsulates everything bad with 1960s music. It's
Yes.
like all of the generic pop songs, pop romances, and also all of the generic ballads of the time. Um, this is the first time where I've actually written down the name of every single track and a couple of notes per track, because the first time that I listened through it, I couldn't recognize like the difference between the two. It was like, oh, there's the happy side and there's the sad side, but all the songs sound the same. Which,
Oh,
maybe uh maybe someone can really enjoy that. It's like, oh, it flows from one to the other seamlessly. But to me, it was genuinely just confusing to listen to, without focusing on it. When I actually focus on it, you can tell there's differences. There are some interesting tracks in here to talk about, I think. But generally, yeah, I think the funniest thing is that, I'm always the positive guy. I'm always positive man. I like to bring some light into the world. And I was just like, you know what, you and like, let me just find an album that's not that good. Let's just talk about one of those. And you
yeah.
offered this one, so I'm curious to know your thoughts on this.
I remember sending this to you, and it was actually after I listened to a Beach Boys album called Wild Honey, which when I first listened to it, I really couldn't stand it. And I gave it another listen recently, just before I did the Surfs Up one, and it was really good. I enjoyed it. It was very light. It was very considered. It was very mature for what it was and where it came in the sort of discography of the Beach Boys. And it gave me hope to go back to the Beach Boys today, which I had kind of written off as just, again, like you said there, very sort of pop, generic, mid 60s type of music. Nothing wrong with that type of music, and some of it's quite good. But I'd remembered it more fondly than I experienced this time. Um, there's no way of wording it any less bluntly. It is awful. I really didn't like it again. It's pretty terrible, and I rank all my albums that I've listened to, and I've put it below Ariana Grande's Positions.
Hmm.
It's also below Muse's recent album. It is uh, it is above Mainskin's latest release, only slightly. Um,
Oh.
but as far as the Beach Boys go and what they're remembered for, the imagery I get is associated really close with the album. But I've always hated that imagery. Just personally, it doesn't do anything for me. The whole summer loving, we're going surfing. That's a big surfboard for five men type of thing with all the the camper van and the loving the sun and the Beach Boys literal being Beach Boys.
Mhm.
It's always a shtick that I've thought the band at the best was actively moving away from. Like literal Beach Boys, no. Pet Sounds does a great job. Surfs Up takes it the next level, and then they kind of, they started doing some pretty poor stuff. Um,
Mm.
as far as the Beach Boys today goes, though, it's like again, it was one of the earliest albums I listened to because it's so early on in the book. And I think just a lack of knowledge about music at the time really helped this one along. If you
Mm.
don't really know what the Beach Boys is or how they started, this will sound nothing like Pet Sounds. It'll sound nothing like Surfs Up. And I suppose that makes it quite interesting as a sort of, oh wow, this is how they started. It's rather telling that they moved away from that sound as soon as they could, because it just wasn't very challenging. Brian Wilson always says that one of the reasons they made Pet Sounds was because it was more artistically defined. It was more refined in the sense of if you're looking at the competition of the Beatles and the Stones at the time, it moves them closer to the likes of Revolver, the likes of Sergeant Pepper's, the likes of
Mm.
Sticky Fingers, even if that's later on in Exile on Main Street. It moves them closer to that. Beach Boys today maintains an image that doesn't feel right for the sound that they're best known for, and it's a pretty bold series of claims in that insert to say which track was it that's as good as God only knows. Kiss Me Baby is as good as God only knows. Um, did you make notes on that track? Because I think I tuned out by that point.
My note is nice piano in the beginning. That's the note. Because everything else, it's one of those, a bit sad, a bit melancholic
Yeah,
songs.
yeah.
It's like I was listening to it. I listened to it twice. I was like, I have nothing to say about this one.
I
um,
can, yeah. It has a nice piano, but you know what? God only knows has a nice piano as well. I guess probably it's been a while
God
since
only
I listened
knows
to that.
is perfect. It's probably my favorite Beach Boys song.
Yeah,
It's probably the most beloved
it's
Beach
the
Boys
Beach
song
Boys
as
song.
well.
Yeah,
It's the Beach Boys song,
yeah,
and for good reasons, because it has not only does it have the catchy tune, the summery vibes, but it also manages to hint at that, kind of sadness that's always kind of present in a lot of their tracks here and there, and that's very appealing to me. But Beach Boys today is just juvenile, it's just a bit infantile, you know.
yes.
There's some tracks in here. I don't know when you want to get into them properly, but like "Don't Hurt My Little Sister," some very very questionable
Yeah.
lyrics.
It,
uh, it's not the only one.
I always like this discussion on lyrics. I think it's very important who is writing the lyrics and where the audience goes to. The most infamous example is probably Ringo Starr when he was in his mid 30s writing a love song aimed at a 16-year-old, which is as creepy as it gets. But the fact that he used it as a single to promote his debut album is just another level. And then you get the flip side of more recent music with stuff like the Ratons, which is a very big UK thing at the moment.
Mhm.
Their second album is just Arctic Monkeys' first album, but instead of really good colloquial commentary on culture and politics, sophisticated, well, it just has lines saying, "Oh, she'll get her tits out for a tenner." That's the exact change that's made there. It's again, they're in their mid 30s. Alex Turner was pretty young when he started writing that, and you can see that he's matured from whatever people say, and that's what I'm not, to the car. Over that, there is clear progression. The Ratons have done two albums, they sound exactly the same and are still riffing on a sort of style and an idea Alex Turner abandoned
Mhm.
over 2 decades ago. For the Beach Boys, I think the run of the first four tracks is horrific. I really do think that "Do You Want to Dance" it just annoys me of how sort of simple it is, and a lot of it comes down to that wall of sound effect, which is like the Phil Spector classic. I get it. There are
Mhm.
albums that do it really well. Again, you know, back in the day and also modern. I mean, Crawlers, for instance, from this year actually did it really well, and that's a nice modern vitalization of the wall of sound. The Beach Boys today, I mean, not today as in 2023. I mean, Beach Boys it is in
quote
1965.
unquote.
Oi. It's a really terrible working of the wall of sound because it just sounds messy. It sounds sloppy. It sounds as though the sentiment doesn't come from the lyrics, but it comes from the mixing, which is just essentially wet sophistication. It's
Mm,
kind of like they're actively pursuing meaning in their thematics and their constructs and their instrumentals without having anything to say in the first place. That wall of sound is a really good cover for empty songs. And even if the songs
totally.
aren't empty, there are some really questionable lyrics. Um,
Yes.
I've what would you say is the worst questionable song on this album? Because
Oh,
there's
for
more than a handful, all of them.
I would say for me, "Don't Hurt My Little Sister" is the one that really got to me, especially listening to it.
Yeah,
It's all about this relationship between like this man. The singer is the brother of this guy. And it's like, oh man, you're with my sister. Don't hurt her. Treat her well. Even though she doesn't really want to do some things, just treat her well. you know, Please don't hurt her. It's very much a product of its time
yeah,
in terms of just lyrics. It doesn't help. The sound itself is very annoying. It's just mind numbing. Like you said, the
yeah,
first few tracks are just this non-stop barrage of sounds just thrown at you. It's like it never slows down, never slows down. Every single first lyric is the title of the song, so you know which song you're listening to. It's like that type of.
yes,
It's that type
exactly that.
of writing, and it's I don't know. It's fascinating when you were talking about all of the history of the album a little bit, how this happened. It almost feels like they were trying to become, or maybe they were just more aware of their commercial value and they had to kind of solidify their position in the mainstream and in the zeitgeist to the point of like, what do the people want? They want that. We have to clean our reputation, so we're just going to give them exactly what they want. And so it's the stereotypical, beach surfer songs, um, with very questionable lyrics. What are some
Yeah.
lyrics that actually really
Well, it's
bothered
it's
you?
funny we mentioned "Don't Hurt My Little Sister," which was a Brian Wilson written track that was actually meant for the Ronettes, the Phil Spector group at the time.
Ah.
Phil Spector said, "Okay, yes, change the lyrics," and then he gave it to the Blossoms. The Ronettes never bothered with it, and Brian Wilson was like, "Well, I've still got the original. I'll cover it." Now, the defense that Beach Boys fans will likely have, and I understand the line of thought, but in this instance, I don't agree with it,
Mm.
is that at the core of it, it's been written for another artist. It's written, I guess, from their perspective. I can see that defense. On the other hand, Brian Wilson has still written this track. I'm pretty sure the Ronettes were capable of writing a track about their own little sister rather than Brian Wilson writing about their little sister. Very big difference. Very, very creepy. Very, very strange.
Very
Again,
true.
like you said, it is a product of the time. And, I think there's like there's a slider on how bad it gets for sort of product of the time. This one's somewhere
Yeah.
between Woody Allen's Manhattan and like Miss 45. It's somewhere between there. Um, it's one of many many difficult tracks. Not difficult in the sense of obviously thematically they're quite difficult for some people. I find it difficult just to listen to on a perspective of music that can or can't be enjoyed. I don't think it sounds good, let alone doesn't settle well. For lack of a better word,
Mm.
I don't think you can have a track that says, "Why don't you kiss her? Tell her you miss her. Treat her nice. Don't hurt my little sister." Which is some of the worst lyrics. I wonder if that's the track they meant regarding like worst of the book. I Can it get worse than that? I can't get worse than that. Surely not. I should point out though, most of the tracks on this album are written by Brian Wilson, who then went on to do Pet Sounds, which is mad,
He had
insane.
to get it out of his system,
He did.
just kind
I
of
think
cleanse himself.
I remember really hating when I grew up I want to be a man, and I'm not sure
Mm.
why. I feel like it just didn't settle well.
I
Um
actually really like that one.
oh really?
It's
Oh.
it's it's among my top two favorites because I couldn't really pick
Oh.
a third one that I really enjoyed. um, but yeah, it's. I think that's where not only the music it was, it starts to slow down a little bit. It's still very
Yes.
upbeat.
Yeah.
It's still very fun, but it's starting to slow down a little bit in terms of just energy. which is welcome, welcome change of pace. But also the lyrics I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
Um,
You know
you know,
what? Yeah.
this examination of just you know, it's this exploration of what it means to grow up. Who are you when you are older? Is it the same person that you were when you were like 15 or 20? I really enjoyed the idea as well that in the background you have the chorus that keeps on, adding years to the singers, to the
Yes.
protagonist, let's
Yeah.
say, of the song, leading up until I think like 30 or 31. So it gives you the idea of like the passage of time, and you're the same person but also you're completely different, and are you even worthy of being a man? What does it mean to be good, to be bad, like those types
Yes.
of
Yeah.
feelings. It's not, it's nothing particularly philosophical in a deep way, but for the standard of this album, especially
Yes.
coming after Don't Hurt My Little Sister, it's like, okay, so he's saying something here. Who did actually write this one? Was it still?
When I Grew Up to Be a Man was indeed Brian Wilson and Mike
Ah,
Love.
okay. Okay.
I'm happy to roll it back when I said it was a bad track. I mean, lyrically, I think the ending hook where it's "Won't Last Forever," it's kind of sad. I think that's really strong.
Hmm.
Um, Lyrically, again, it's kind of like it borders a lot on easy listening, and I don't find this an easy listen, not because of the lyrics or the content, but because of it's quite difficult to push through that wall of sound sometimes. And I think that was my issue here, where it's loud. I really like wall of sound stuff, but this just I think because they're trying so hard to be upbeat, it feels like I'm getting suffocated by a smile. It's kind of really pushing down on me. It's really trying to make me feel energetic and upbeat and optimistic, but it's not giving me a more sophisticated or even fun reason to.
Mm.
It's not giving me anything that the Beatles hadn't done 2 years ago on Please Please Me, which is also a kind of shaky album as well. I don't know how many death threats I'll get for that one, but I stand by it. Um, I think it's again. I think on the flip side of don't don't kiss my sister or whatever it was. I've already forgotten the track
Hurt My
now.
Little Sister.
Don't hurt my little sister.
Don't Kiss My
Um,
Sister is like the attack of the original song. It's like, this is how you write it,
yeah,
man.
yeah, yeah,
Just don't kiss her, just protect her at all cost.
yeah. I feel
Save
like
her from you.
I feel like When I Grow Up to Be a Man is a kind of flip side time capsule thing of like, oh, when I grow up, I'm going to do this, this, and this. I get it. I get it. I dig it, as they say back in the 60s. Um, but I do take with the issue with the will I look for the same things in a woman that I do in a girl 14, 15? It's like, oh,
Yeah,
what,
that
sorry,
was a
what?
bit. I was like, what is a girl 14, 15? It's one thing. But then I realized it was, the years going
Yes,
by.
yeah, I realised that
Um,
as well. I was like, hang on a
it
second.
took a second, though. Yeah, I agree.
Again, it's like it wouldn't take that second though if it weren't so buried under the wall of sound stuff. I mean, that
Mm,
really
mhm.
does take away a lot from the Beach Boys today, and it's a shame because I do kind of like the sort of light rock and roll style, and they do that well in Wild Honey, and they do it well before. Like Surfing USA
Yeah.
is a popular track. I'm not saying it's my favorite. I don't think
Mm,
you know Surfing USA is good, I guess. Yeah, it's fine. It's got a legacy to it, and I think that stands it up a lot. Like the Beach Boys today, I think it depends on its legacy, and I think it rests on its laurels too much.
mm.
And I just want to read out this little bit of criticism from Richard Meltzer because he says this is the song that decided that the Beach Boys had abruptly ceased to be boys.
Oh,
I can
okay.
see that perspective. I kind of agree with it. What do you think of that? Just a
Is it
sort of
about, wait, which one? When I Grow Up to Be a Man?
when I grew up to be a man. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
Mhm.
Even though it's probably the placement in the album itself that's a
Mm.
bit. If it were more towards the end of it, maybe it would
Yeah.
feel like there's a natural progression to all of the
That's
songs as
yes.
well. Um, but other than that, especially considering the quality of some of the other songs in this album, I can see that. I would actually agree.
Yeah.
Um, Especially considering as well where they're going to go moving forward with their music and with their writing, and writing, doing Pet Sounds as well the year after. There's. I wonder if it is indeed kind of them trying to use their medium as a way to do something more than just being the song that's
Yeah.
played on the jukebox, or that you go to a concert and there's 15-year-old girls just screaming because they want a piece of you.
Yeah.
You do feel the sense of maturity. I would even say not only in When I Grew Up to Be a Man, but even Please Let Me Wonder. It's kind of the flip side of this song,
Yes.
where
Yeah.
it's a bit much slower, more melancholic, quieter, introspective, and it still tackles some of those ideas of childhood and the past and moving forward. Those were easily the two tracks when I was listening to them. Not only do they sound nice, but it's still like, generally speaking, it's not like any of these songs are bad per se in terms of music. It's just they all sound the same. Like when
Yeah.
you're listening to one after the other, they blur together. But at least Please Let Me Wonder did stick out from the other sad, sappy songs from the second half.
And I think that's a really key thing you've mentioned there with how an album constructs itself, where the
Hmm.
songs lie and where they're placed and how they link up with the other tracks. Like you said there, if When I Grew Up to Be a Man was the last track of the album, stunning, amazing. What a way to end it. It would still sound the same because all the other tracks sound the same, but it's all about the placement and about the journey an album could take you on. I hate the word journey that I've just used there because it makes me sound like a hippie. But I do truly believe that in the right structure, an album can really tell a story, and that was something I kind of didn't believe when I first started listening to music.
Hmm.
Because I always thought, I mean, when I was about 17, 18, I would listen to music in the same sense that most people do, kind of popular songs, whatever was on, and that would do it. Um, Albums have such a important ability to tell stories like that. That link up between When I Grow Up and Please Let Me Wonder is such a perfect link up. The fact that it's missed and just kind of, you got to get through Dance, Dance, Dance to get to a real storytelling element
Okay.
is really puzzling. I don't get it.
Yeah, I have a question that's even more puzzling, because
Oh dear.
when I listened to this album, I also went on Spotify because I like to just in a sociological, anthropological way. I'm curious to see what tracks are actually popular.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
noticed Dance 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 is the most popular track by a mile. It's almost like 4 million listens. And I was
What?
like, why is this so popular? Out of all the songs from this album, it's like that one, Do You Wanna Dance? And there's like another one that are in the 1+ million listens.
I
And I
think
was
people.
wondering if there's any reason. Was it like present in a popular TV show for teenagers?
Maybe it was confused with Dance Dance from Fallout Boy. I guess that's the only explanation, that they've sort of, all the pop punk emos have gone to listen to Dance Dance, accidentally typed too many dances and found the Beach Boys, and they've clicked on it and thought, oh, what's this? And by the time they've clicked off of it, it's already registered it as a play.
It's the five
Um,
seconds necessary to to qualify.
as far as it being used, it's, well, put it this way: when I was doing my notes, it was the Wikipedia page with the least amount of information on it. Um, it
Very
was a
telling as
single.
well.
It was one of those songs that was under 2 minutes. I remember a lot of Beach Boys songs from when I used to do radio.
Hmm.
And you'd have like 2.5 minutes left of your show to fill, and you'd have to have it bang on an hour. And the easiest thing to do was to put a Beach Boys song in because they were so short.
They're very short.
They are really short, and I like that, but there has to be a variation of style
Hmm.
where it can, you can signal this is this track, this is that track, rather than it just bleeding together. Now, I know there are albums that bleed together really nicely, like Abbey Road, Dark Side of the Moon. They feel intentional. Beach Boys' album here is just kind of a very static approach to their sound. They've done it before, they did it again. It was more of an assembly line than anything else. We criticize Marvel for doing this now. I'd level that criticism at the Beach Boys for stuff like this. They were producing very short, very, I guess, sweet, um, 2 minute pop riffs and throwing them out on the radio. I mean, Dance 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 charted at number 8 on the US Billboard Top 100, which, you know, the Billboard at the time was a big deal. And obviously that preceded, was preceded by When I Grew Up to Be a Man, which in the Billboard charts was number 9. So you can see why they pushed them out, and it is of course because it's like the teen favorites.
Hmm.
Um, and I get it, I get it, but it's the crowd, it's the people that experience that music and sort of like that stuff. It's never really changed. The Beach Boys of today is the stuff like Lewis Capaldi and Ed Sheeran, and I know that sounds like a weird comparison, but chart music has always been chart music. You will never have a weird outlier in there. I mean, I'm not knocking the charts. I feel like the charts are a terrible, terrible waste because people don't move past the top 40 anymore. People don't go
Hmm.
and listen to more of what's out there, and it's very lucky when an album will chart in the top five. Um, Key examples of that from the last year being Suede and Yardak, for instance. They were really good albums that charted. Hopefully, it made a difference, but I think the bulk of the chart are dominated by very similar sounding stuff, and it was the same in the 60s as it was now. Even if the 60s was dominated by artists that are now revered and respected, like the Beach Boys, like the Beatles, it's a cycle. And
Yeah.
accepting the fact that stuff like When I'm a Man and Dance 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 were up there is to also accept the relevance of God Only Knows being up there. Um, but speaking of God Only Knows, it's more or less the same as Kiss Me Baby, apparently. What did you think of Kiss Me Baby? Um, which is,
That's a nice piano song.
it is.
It feels very. Yeah, actually, it's funny because it came actually before God Only Knows. So it's God Only Knows is derivative of this song.
Yeah, I guess.
Anyway, but you gotta start somewhere. You gotta develop your own style, even though they've been singing for a while at this point. Um, I think it's even interesting what you were saying. I wonder how audiences of the time felt about this song and this album as a whole. If it was considered one of those very very pop, very like, it's for the kids, for the teenagers, and like you said, it's the cycle. They end up becoming widely revered. We've reached the point where nowadays, Rebecca Black and Friday have been revaluated as a brilliant song and a piece of music. So I
I
think every
am.
15 to 20 years, every single weird teenage album is going to become, we're going to get to the One Direction, those they're actually great.
This is how
Um,
Pauline Kael kept relevant. She just spotted that stuff straight away and wrote about it at the time like that. It's a very smart way to do it. I'm glad you brought up Rebecca Black, though. It's just a little aside, and I mentioned this to Carson
okay.
actually after we stopped recording. Rebecca Black's new album is fantastic. It
I'm really
really,
interested.
really is. Um,
Nice.
it, the obvious connotation is burn down the previous image of Friday. She's waited 13 years to do a debut album. Very powerful first two tracks, and then it's just it doesn't stick around saying, oh, people should really move on, get rid of that old image. She's confident that she's sorted that in the first two tracks and just moves into this sort of drum and bass electronic style that I would have never expected, and it's such a shock to the
Wow.
system. It's great. um and I
Yeah.
feel like this is Rebecca Black's Friday is the Beach Boys' Kiss Me Baby. You know, they were
You need.
doing this sort of style for so long. They were going over and over it. They'd done Surfing USA. They'd done so many albums that if you go into like a charity shop or like a discount store and there's
Mhm.
records there, you know the type of album I mean, where very tatty has been found under some grandparent's bed in a box that hasn't been touched in about 20 years, has been
Mhm.
thrown on the shelf with the rest of the compilation tapes and the CD singles, and right there you pull it out. Oh, Beach Boys Today, Cobwebs, Spine Broken. That's the album that I associated with that shelf so vividly. And I think the reason why is I've seen this album three separate times in one shot. Um,
Ooh.
and I think now that we have the benefit of hindsight and people look back on discographies of bands and artists that are really high regarded, it's very easy to suggest that all of what they did was brilliant. I've seen a lot of revisionism in David Bowie, for instance, with his sort of mid '80s period, that the kind of the period after Let's Dance, but before he started making Earthling and the weird trance rave stuff, which is very interesting. But you know, stuff like I'll have to get it up because I genuinely cannot for the life of me remember the name of it. So I've got to sort through 24 tonight. It was right there. David Bowie did an album called Tonight in 1984. It's awful, terrible, but it's going to get revision. It's going to be revisited by new generations who, years and years down the line, are going to say this is actually very good, and this is the reason why he was ahead of his time. It's like you're just putting the time now onto that album, and I think the issue with the Beach Boys today is that they're putting that and comparing it to Pet Sounds. They're
Hmm.
taking the sort of chart influence and the stylish choice of the Beach Boys, and then going, well, it turned into this. And then in hindsight, we can look back and go, wow, what a change of pace. But you can hear the elements on this album. You can't. You can't hear the elements on this album. What you can hear on this album is a lot of doo wop influence, which is very interesting, I think.
Yes.
I think that's probably the strongest part of the album as a whole. Kiss Me Rhonda,
Mm-hmm.
Kiss Me Baby. What was it? Help Me Rhonda, not Kiss Me
Help me
Rhonda.
around. That was
It all blurs together. It may as well be one track. Kiss Me Baby, definitely. It's kind of got like the English horn, the doo wop style.
mm-hmm.
Again, is like an early taking of that. I will give credit to the Beach Boys today for doing that really well. If you can hear it over the rest of the instruments and the a cappella and the singing and everything else,
That's A grade earring right there.
yeah, it's not good for me either because obviously my hearing's not the best. It's hard to decipher, and it's getting harder to decipher what's going on in music. Um, that's not a knock at Phil Spector. That's a knock at my tinnitus. But it's a doo wop styling that to compare the Beach Boys and the Beatles again. Paul McCartney would use on "Oh Darling" years later, which we spoke about in the second episode of this podcast. Actually, how young and spirited we were. Um,
Good times. I
I
do wonder
just
sometimes if all of this is just reactionary with art in general. I think you get to a point where you have these big names, these titans of various industries,
yeah
like your David Bowies and like your Beach Boys. It almost feels like we're so accustomed to what greatness means from them that if you say, oh, one of my favorite David Bowie songs is, I don't know, Life on Mars, for
yeah
instance. It's like, well, of course. Of course it's great. Duh, everyone knows that. What's your favorite Beach Boy song? Probably God Only Knows. Of course. Of course, it's the most
yeah
popular one. Therefore, everyone's kind of looking for something that's a bit more niche, underappreciated, and it almost feels and again some of that does definitely come from a place of heart, from goodness, from passion, from all of that good stuff, but sometimes it does feel like people force themselves to really 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 like something. It's like in movie terms, it's like people saying that Black Hat is the best Michael Mann film. It's like, bless your heart, bless your heart, I'm so
yeah
happy you love that film. But I cannot agree in any way. And it's probably because it's so underappreciated. You kind of want to support your favorite artist. And I do wonder if, in some way, the Beach Boys today, of course, it's not the least known album of the Beach Boys, but it does feel so banal
yeah
compared to others that they've released. I do wonder if even the lovely writer of the book just putting it in there, it's his way of kind of championing this band he really likes from the past and being like, you know what, this album was underappreciated. It's actually really good. And there is one terrible track, probably the worst track out of all the 5,000 songs in this book, but uh,
on that ground alone, where you've admitted that this album has one of the worst songs, not on the album itself or in the Beach Boys discography, but in 1,001 albums, out of every song, there's probably hundreds of thousands of songs on that book. Out of all of
sure,
those, this one has the worst. Now, that's an inflection of, maybe it's, every song on the album's good. Not every song on the album's or the list is going to be good.
of course, yeah.
And to that end, and I think especially the episode we did last week with Carson, um, it feels like some of the entries are being contrarian for the sake of it, so they can be different, so they can inspire some clicks, some revenue, and
Mm,
go, oh, you might not have heard of this one, and then you listen to it, and it's like, yes, I see why I've not heard of this one, because it's just not good. It just plain isn't good. It's put it this way: if it was on the radio in like a segment, I wouldn't turn it off because I wouldn't have time to. It's a minute 30. I'm not going to be able to turn it off. Um, and it's a key example of revisionism in music where it's the reviews at the time were kind of like, yeah, it's fine, Record
mm.
Mirror at the time gave it 3 out of 5. It is a 3 out of 5 album. Well, I mean, I've given it a 2, but um,
It's fair, though, I'd say.
it is, yeah. And then you've got. I don't mean to rinse all music. I've no problem with anybody I'm mentioning here. All Music gave it 5 stars in a contemporary review, and it's like, what? Sorry,
Out of 10?
five stars, 5 out of 5. Really? Um, it's I think it's because people now know more about Brian Wilson, because people now know more about his personal life, his mental
Mm,
health. I think Love and Mercy is a great job of showcasing that. As far as biopics go, and a lot of the information gathered in that and in sort of more recent history is dependent on the fact that we now know more about the Beach Boys, and then we can take that perspective and put it back onto an album that probably had nothing much to do with the time. The only reference to it in the entry is that Brian Wilson had a breakdown on tour and started writing again. The bulk of that writing is on Pet Sounds. To infer that it's all the Beach Boys today, I don't buy it. I really don't. I could be wrong because my research was done an hour ago, but I could be wrong. um,
you can see some of those elements kind of
yeah,
starting to creep in some of the lyrics here and there, even some of the sounds, let's say in
yeah.
the second half. But nah, it's reaching to say it's
It's
present
reaching,
here.
yes,
It's present. You can feel it. It's like, you know.
and it's. I think we've addressed the kind of legacy of it there. I was going to ask about the legacy, but it feels inflated because of the standard that is allegedly inspired.
Hmm.
You know, there are allegations now that the Beach Boys today inspired Pet Sounds. That's not coming from me. That's coming from the book. I don't buy that. Not at all. Um, their wall of sound feels a lot more fluid. This feels like an experiment that went wrong, and that they learned from rather than were inspired by. There's a very big difference, and I get why people might confuse it, but I think it's more important to learn from the mistakes of the Beach Boys
Mm,
today to go on to make Pet Sounds, which is a brilliant album. Um,
yeah.
I think we might as well move it to the closers, the best track of the piece. A very easy question, of course.
I'd probably go with When I Grow Up to Be a Man. Do you? You do have Please Let Me Wonder, close second there. But actually, we didn't mention, and maybe this is actually the worst song that
Oh,
drives,
I think I know
maybe,
what you're gonna
but
say.
it's the final one. You know,
Yeah,
it's the
yeah,
coda. It's a bull session with Big Daddy, which is literally like 2 minutes of the Beach Boys are having a lunch break.
yeah.
Just someone
Um,
arriving with hamburgers and sandwiches and whatnot.
the the official listing on Wikipedia lists this as audio verite, um,
Oh,
which is
it's
another
very
word for
fancy.
saying they had a spare track and they needed to put something together, but also needed some stuff to leave for the B sides and the demos.
They
It's
forgot to turn off
nonsense.
the microphone.
I don't know if it's just a pet peeve or if I've got a leg to stand on here, but I hate intro tracks, intermissions,
Uh-huh.
outros. I think they very rarely do anything to warrant being listed by themselves. I think Way's Blood does it best, or the Gorillas. I was thinking of the Monkeys, or Gorillas with Damon Albarn on the first album.
Hmm.
Um, very very limited space where you can warrant having an intermission. I think uh, Little Sims does it really well on Sometimes I Might Be Introvert. There are really few examples where I can go, that's such an incredible intermission because it's more than just a bridge between two songs. If you can't bridge your two songs without an intermission, then you've done something wrong or are just not
Hmm.
actively pursuing an intermission anyway.
One
So to
thing
have
that I
it
do
in
really
there,
like, one type of
yeah.
thing like that I like is the only example that comes to mind is Amy Mann. But sometimes she has these songs where both the beginning of the recording and the end of the recording, like when everyone is like stops playing the instrument, is present. That's kind of fun to
Yes.
me
Yeah.
when the track has, like the tuning after room, and then they start playing, and then at the end it's like, oh yeah,
That's good.
it's a nice
Yeah.
job, man. Yeah, no, it's nice. Yeah, and then it just closes. Like that's kind of fun. But yeah, just to have
The
this
the
this
key to those though is
audio
it's
verite at the end is it's an
yeah,
Easter egg. You need to have
it's
it. I
an
don't know.
Easter egg. It's like Her Majesty on Abbey Road, but
That's the one. Yes, also, yeah,
what you mentioned there with kind of like the tuning up and the playing out, I really like as well. But it feels like it's connected to the track itself. Like it's
yeah. Hmm.
part of that. The official release is going to feature that at the end, rather than without it and as its own little like 6 second clip. Because let's be fair, most people listen to music in playlists and shuffle them. You are not going to put an intermission track in your playlist. Let's be fair. Let's be reasonable.
Oh
We've
yeah.
got to accept that people listen to music like that. I listen to music like that. I just shuffle an LCD sound system album the way I go for the day. But speaking of other albums that we're more fond of, would you replace this album with anything in particular?
Oh, I wouldn't even replace it. I would just remove it completely from this. This is just not worth it. Just save this space up for literally any other album.
Yeah.
I do really like, speaking of the Beach Boys, of course, you mentioned Pet
Mhm.
Sounds. I've listened to another album as well. I forgot. I've listened to like 3 or 4 albums of the Beach Boys, but definitely Pet Sounds
Yeah.
has the most iconic songs, as the best songs, I'd say. Because otherwise, nah. Like that's the other thing. It's kind of like my closing thought on this album as a whole. It's that I'd never listened to any of this song prior to this recording. Like before actually opening up the album and listening to it,
Yeah.
I swear I've never heard any of these songs before.
Yeah. No.
Which is which is even more baffling when I saw that they had like millions of listens on Spotify.
I
It's like
feel
you
like,
think maybe on
yeah.
the radio, or like even because like on the radio, especially in the evening, we used to usually listen to the radio, and there's like this niche DJ who
Yeah.
kind of plays a lot of famous bands, lesser known tracks, and I've never heard any of those from the Beach Boys. So, it's forgettable, sadly.
I yeah, we must be out the loop on something. I don't get how these are so
Mm-mm.
popular. Considering like outside of the Beach Boys today, I've never heard one of these on its own, isolated. But I do have replacement albums to start cracking through now.
Okay, yeah.
So in some ways, I was trying to keep it thematic, where I was replacing albums with something from the same year or the same band.
Hmm.
And I very quickly realized that there are artists that wouldn't get on the list that way because they're not from the same year or the same band. So I'm just going to start lobbing my contemporary stuff on there that I think should have been on. Now the big asterisk against this is that I've got every album up until 2021 on the list of 1,001 albums. So my list cuts off, I believe. I'll scroll down my very long schedule. My list cuts off at 2021 with Hawk's Tales by Jasmine Sullivan. That's the most recent entry I've got.
Okay.
Last week was the second most recent, which was Count Chills Over the Country Club by Lana Del Rey. I haven't got anything for 2022 yet. So on those grounds, I will not add anything from 2022 until we've covered 2022, which may prove troublesome. I haven't figured
It's
that
a
out
bit
yet.
daunting.
Yeah, I've just very quickly checked that I've not put anything by 2022 on, and we're safe for now.
For
Actually,
now.
yeah, yeah. I
Give
think
it
the next one.
time. Give
So
it time.
the one I'm going to add to the list is from 2021. It's Sam Fender's 17 Going Under,
Okay.
which I thought it was criminal that that was overlooked compared to what was on for 2021. I don't think an album has been that big for the UK, and I don't say this lightly. And I don't like Oasis, but I don't think we've had an album in the UK as big as this since definitely maybe since Arctic Monkeys' AM. And the offset of that is those two are very popular albums that have been sort of iconoclast. They've been adapted. People love it. They love the image associated with it, and that's happened with Sam Fender 17 Going Under. As well as that, on top of that, is that the colloquialisms of the album have made an area popular, same way Arctic Monkeys did
Mm.
with their debut album. Newcastle's all the rage now. And, as much as I hate living where I do currently, I do kind of like that I can brag about being from there, which, it's
Quality
handy.
concerts all around.
It's very rare that you'll find an album that has inspired Londoners to wear a Northeast football T-shirt, and I think any album that can actually do that deserves a place on the list. I really do. Beyond that, I think it's possibly the one. It's I think by the end of this decade, when this podcast starts to wrap up, it will be up there as one of the top 5 of the decade, hands down,
Nice.
without a doubt. I have no doubt in my mind that I think he's peaked at that. To be honest, um, it's beautiful. It's very moving. It's very rooted in the area, but it's key to that is making it, about growth, about life, about hardship, about movement, and about moving on. And kind of to link it back to the Beach Boys today, it does everything the Beach Boys is trying to talk about, but better and in one song rather than 12.
Mm.
So I'll pop Sam Fender on the list. I think that's fair. I think that's the 4th change I've made out of 21. So that's
It's a good average, I'd
acceptable
say.
acceptable
Yeah.
going for now. We haven't, to be fair, tackled the more contemporary releases, such as I've mentioned it many times, but CeeLo Green's The Love Machine. It's got to go. It's got to go. And speaking of Gotta Go, we might as well plug our sort of what a link that was. That was incredible.
Excellent segue.
I'd cut this
Bravo.
bit if I knew how to edit properly. That was great. Brilliant. Do you want to plug your social there? Fantastic.
So happy, so pleased.
Um,
You can follow me, of course, on Twitter and Instagram at NickyGra97, and there you can find links to everything that I do. You know, there's my letterbox reviews, my short films on YouTube and Vimeo. I have a new short film out right now, which is called My Choice. Definitely check it out. And also my writing for Clapper, and also cult following. Maybe there'll be more of that in the near future. Oh, and listen to the Death Adaptation podcast. I just blanked for a second. I was like, there's something else I'm missing.
I was waiting for you to say it. That's why I left a little bit of a pause. I was like, are you going to mention the other thing we do? Maybe? No?
There's too many ideas and thoughts in my mind. But of course, yes, there's the Death Adaptation podcast as well. Ewan is more often than not a guest. There is a co-host as well of the podcast.
I think by the time this episode of the podcast is out, the Naked Lunch episode will be out.
Probably. If it's March, yeah. March, mid-March, yeah.
This is going out in February.
And no, not yet.
No, cut that.
We did talk about Twilight, though.
Yes,
joined also by Carson Timar, friend of this podcast, and Hilary White, which was a very fun Valentine's Day special.
I think I lost my mind a bit there because, like, towards the end of it, I ran out of like drink, and I was like, "What if Woody Allen directed Twilight?" I was like, "What the fuck?" Anyway,
creating wonderful images in our minds. Just I'd watch that. I'd see that.
Yeah. Speaking of wonderful images, you can find my work. He's on
You're
fire,
on fire,
ladies and gentlemen. He's on fire. He was almost on fire earlier when he nearly blew up his kitchen.
Same energy. Same energy.
You can find my work on Cult Following, Daily Star, other places. You know what? Find my work if you want to. Just Google my name, Ewan Gleadow. You can get me on Twitter as well, at Ewan Gleadow, EWANGLEADOW. And go and follow Don't Listen to This podcast on Twitter as well, DLTT Pod. It's all down there. Look at it go. Magical. Fantastic. iMovie's brilliant, man. It's fantastic. And like I said to you before we started recording, I'm going to get you to wave because this then syncs up the podcast. But I've realised that this is now the ending, so we're just going to leave the waves in. I'm waving with the wrong hand, so I'm going to have to reach over.